Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Excellencies, delegates from the foreign countries, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first of all thank Asfar for always inviting me to these very eventful gatherings, which are a very learning experience for me. I've been sitting here since the morning, and the insights which I have gained during the discussions and during the speeches was really very, very useful. So I consider this to be, all of us, to be refreshing and completely updating our engine of learning. So I want to thank you for providing me this opportunity. And this particular event, which is Navigating for the Unknown, is very much jiving with what I want to submit. I won't repeat because my distinguished panelists have aptly said what I had intended, so I would skip that. And I would very much like to start by saying upfront that my remarks this afternoon are clouded by a great deal of turmoil and uncertainty on the global geopolitical and economic scene. Tariff escalation and trade war, accompanied by paralysis of World Trade Organization, the dissolution of US aid, the retreat of US from climate change agenda and WHO, the cut down in official development assistance by UK, Germany, France, and I suspect it's likely to be followed by other EU member countries, have created an atmosphere where the developing countries are striving to find their feet on ground. Climate finance, which was beginning to attract attention and find some traction since Paris Accord for the first time, is at serious risk. It's not obvious to me whether the multilateral financial institutions would be able to adhere to their previous commitments towards accelerated allocation towards climate mitigation and adaptation, because the single largest shareholder is putting its foot down. My fear is that in view of the reduction in overall volume of international financial flows, humanitarian assistance would preempt the bulk of these resources, leaving little for sustainable development goals and even less for climate change. Innovating financing should therefore aim at finding interventions where climate finance and sustainable development are interlinked and codependent. And this is not a very easy task. By now, we know, on the basis of empirical evidence, that there are no trade-offs involved between economic growth and climate risk mitigation and adaptation. And rightly so, as Helen pointed out, firms can reduce emissions without sacrificing profits. This is what the new knowledge about the climate finance is all about. So managing climate change and environmental disasters for developing countries, in my humble opinion, therefore should be scrutinized in the larger context of the present and future challenges facing them: poverty, inequality, geopolitical tensions, rapid technological advances, and demographics. The question, therefore, is how this positive link can be exploited by developing countries, which are not major emitters, but are highly vulnerable to climate risks, and that includes Pakistan. Reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, adaptation, prevention of environmental hazards, air pollution, and other risks and dislocations should be co-managed with the goals of raising living standards of the poor, marginalized, vulnerable, deprived segments of the society, minimizing gender, income, and regional disparities, increasing opportunities for educational and labor mobility, optimizing water, energy, food nexus by increasing farm productivity, conserving water, and shifting towards renewable energy. Now, I have laid down a huge agenda, but this is where the competence and the vision of the policymakers would come into play. Not only the vision, but the execution of this agenda. If this co-managed strategy is not pursued, I'm afraid we can have cascading impacts that may dampen growth and thus accentuate economic fragility, population displacement, migration, and stalling human capital formation. Response to the climate change must require a serious attention to the needs of the poor, who have less protection against economic upheaval than the rich do. Thus, the cost of adaptation would be easier for the affluent, and therefore, safeguards should be built in that these costs are not passed on to those who are unable to bear it. And floods of 2022 illustrate where the intensity of damage to the small holders and the labor class in the farm areas was much greater than that of the zamindars or the big landowners. And that is something which I noticed when I visited those areas. Therefore, to me, carbon tax is one of the instruments where the incidence falls upon the relatively well-to-do classes. Climate finance should therefore be used widely and judiciously to achieve this balance between adaptation, mitigation, resilience, and sustained growth rates that generate productive employment for the youth, alleviate poverty, and invest in human capital formation. Permit me, as Aisha rightly pointed out, we have both capacity limitations, we have human resource constraint in this field, and we have financial problems facing this country. In this environment, permit me to submit that we have to prioritize our interventions. And to me, which I have been saying for a very long time as a student of development economics, that there are people in Pakistan who believe that throwing money after a problem leads to a solution. Our 78-year history tells us this is a flawed belief. We spent trillions of rupees on our development projects, but have only seen retardation, regression, and retrogression, not progress. I would humbly argue that those of you who think that climate risks would be taken care if we are able to mobilize additional resources, either domestically or internationally, public or private, are sadly mistaken. I would say that climate finance can only work if our governance structure, underlying institutions, regulatory framework, and capacity for policy formulation and execution are all in place. These are the prerequisites for judicious use of the climate finance. And finally, I would say there has to be a broad political ownership that provides continuity and consistency, as climate risks are not coterminous with electoral cycles. So in my view, and people may differ with me, if I have to choose a priority in case of Pakistan, and this linkage and codependence maximization, which I've argued, there's no other intervention which is so obvious as water, food, and energy nexus. And I would like to inform this audience, which knows this already, that the lifeline of Pakistan's sustenance is the Indus River, which is dependent for more than 65% of its flows on snow and glacial melting. Floods, droughts, and changes in rainfall pattern may affect water availability in irrigation system, which feeds 18 million hectares of agricultural land. The Jhelum and Chenab derive 50% of their flows from glacial melting. Most of climate financing should therefore focus on research and development in climate-smart agriculture to produce drought, heat, pest-resistant seed varieties, substituting water-intensive crops, sustainable forests, agroforestry, raising the share of renewable energy sources in place of fossil fuels, and increasing productivity of livestock. And you know, livestock now accounts for 55% of agriculture value addition. And this would require that these investments are affordable to the poor segments of the agriculture population, because the return on this investment is going to help in the long run the productivity of the country, because it's raising the small and medium who are much below the national productivity average. This will augment rural incomes, create demand for consumer goods in the urban areas, alleviate poverty, ensure food security, provided there is equitable distribution of water, access to finance and technical advice, farm-to-market roads, and affordable inputs. Our institutions serving agriculture and agro-businesses have to be revamped for this purpose. After a long hiatus, an ambitious program of constructing 10 reservoirs for water storage has been undertaken to be released in the winter months, and also generating clean hydroelectricity. Small dams and reservoirs, rainwater harvesting, solarization of tube wells, recharging the underground water reservoirs would also help in raising productivity and adapting to climate change at the same time. Public finances, as you all know, and Mr. Musaddiq Malik, member of the cabinet, is fully aware of that, are not strong enough to provide funds for early completion of these projects. Climate finance from multilateral, bilateral, and private funds should be mobilized for completion of these projects, along with the conservation of water through highly efficient irrigation. WAPDA has already raised $500 million by issuing green bonds, but has not yet accessed or tapped other sources of private financing, either from domestic or global investors, for green bonds or sukuks, for which there is a growing demand. So I would suggest to the government of Pakistan that each dam project can be transformed into a corporate entity in the public-private partnership mode, and debt and equity financing can be obtained from domestic and international private markets, which are keen to show their commitments to the green finance. And there is a lot in the private financing community which are looking for these opportunities. Finally, I would end by cautioning the policymakers, and I'm glad the Minister and the Secretary both are here, that we should be more discerning in accepting all modes of financing. The country does not have any more room to take on loan financing, as our debt ratios are already high. The payoff from climate financing are most likely to be in the future, in the long term, while the repayments, including interests, have to be made in short term before the benefits start accruing. This asymmetry between the stream of benefits and costs calls for caution and unvarnished pursuit, and contracting loans in the name of climate finance should therefore be avoided, and other instruments like equity financing, green financing, the guarantees, and other innovating financing modes should be tapped for this purpose. Thank you very much.